Now this gay and graceful tale from Arabia is told with humor and light wit. It is meant for laughter, and the two birds chosen to convey the mood, the stork and owl, are suited to their role. The conversation is merry. There are no tragic overtones of sorrow, and the human relationship between Caliph and Vizier is amusing, with joy implicit. Indeed, the whole story proceeds with the pace of a musical performance. And this here is the story of Caliph Stork. Now, Caliph Chaysid of Baghdad was resting comfortably on his divan one fine afternoon. He was smoking a long pipe, and from time to time he sipped a little coffee that a slave handed him, and after each sip he stroked his long beard with an air of enjoyment. In short, anyone could see that the Caliph was in an excellent humor. This was, in fact, the best time of day in which to approach him, for just now he was quite sure to be in good spirits, and for this reason Grand Vizier Mansour always chose this hour in which to pay his daily visit. He arrived as usual this afternoon, but contrary to his usual manner, with a troubled expression on his face. The Caliph withdrew his pipe from his lips. "Why do you look so anxious, Grand Vizier?" he asked. The Grand Vizier crossed his arms on his breast and bent low before his master as he answered, "O my lord, whether my countenance be anxious, I know not, but down below in the court of the palace is a peddler with such beautiful things that I cannot help feeling annoyed at having so little money to spare." The Caliph, who had wished for some time to give his Grand Vizier a present, ordered his slave to bring the peddler before him at once. The slave soon returned, followed by the peddler, a short, stout man with a swarthy face, dressed in ragged clothes. He carried a box containing all manner of wares, strings of pearls, rings, richly mounted pistols, goblets, and combs. The Caliph and his vizier inspected everything, and the Caliph chose some handsome pistols for himself and Mansour, and a jeweled comb for the vizier's wife. Just as the peddler was about to close his box, the Caliph noticed a small drawer and asked if there was anything in it for sale. The peddler opened the drawer and showed them a box containing a black powder and a scroll written in strange characters which neither the Caliph nor Mansour could read. "I got these two articles from a merchant who had picked them up in the street of Mecca," said the peddler. "I do not know of what value they are, but as they are of no use to me, you are welcome to have them for a trifle." The Caliph, who liked to have old manuscripts in his library, even though he could not read them, purchased the scroll and the box and dismissed the peddler. Then, anxious to know what the contents of the scroll might be, he asked the vizier if he knew of anyone who might be able to decipher it. "Most gracious lord and master," replied the vizier, "near the great mosque lives a man called Selim the Learned, who knows every language under the sun. Send for him. It may be that he will be able to interpret these mysterious characters." Now the learned Selim was summoned immediately. "Selim," said the Caliph, "I hear you are a scholar. Look well at this scroll and see whether you can read it. If you can, I will give you a robe of honor, but if you fail, I will order you to receive 12 strokes on your cheeks and 25 on the soles of your feet, because you have been falsely called Selim the Learned." Selim prostrated himself and said, "Be it according to your will, O master." Then he gazed long at the scroll. Suddenly he exclaimed, "May I die, O my lord, if this isn't Latin." "Well," said the Caliph, "if it is Latin, let us hear what it means." So Selim began to translate. "You who may find this, praise Allah for his mercy. Whoever shall snuff the powder in this box, and at the same time shall pronounce the word mutabor, can transform himself into any creature he likes, and will understand the language of all animals. When he wishes to resume to the human form, he has only to bow 3 times toward the east and to repeat the same word. Be careful, however, when wearing the shape of some beast or bird, not to laugh, or you will certainly forget the magic word and remain an animal forever. Now when Salim the learned had read this, the Caliph was delighted. He made the wise man swear not to tell the matter to anyone, gave him a splendid robe, and dismissed him. Then he said to his vizier, "That's what I call a good bargain, Monsieur. I am longing for the moment when I can turn myself into an animal. Tomorrow morning I shall expect you early. We will go into the country, take some snuff from my box, and then hear what is being said in air, earth, and water." Next morning, Caliph Chasid had barely finished dressing and breakfasting when the Grand Vizier arrived according to orders to accompany him on his expedition. The Caliph thrust the snuff box into his girdle, and having desired his servants to remain at home, started off with only the Grand Vizier in attendance. Now first they walked through the palace gardens, but they looked in vain for some creature which could tempt them to try their magic power. At length the Vizier suggested going farther on to a pond that lay beyond the town, where he had often seen a variety of creatures, especially storks, whose grave, dignified appearance and constant chatter had attracted his attention. Now the Caliph consented, and they went straight to the pond. As soon as they reached it, they saw a stork strutting up and down with a stately air, hunting for frogs, and now and then muttering something to itself. But at the same time, they saw another stork far above in the sky flying toward the same spot. "I would wager my beard, most gracious master," said the Grand Vizier, "that these 2 long legs will have a good chat together. How would it be if we turned ourselves into storks?" "Well said," replied the Caliph, "but first let us remember carefully how we are to become men once more." "True. Bow 3 times toward the east and say Mutabor, and I shall be Caliph, and you my Grand Vizier again. But for heaven's sake don't laugh, or we are lost." As the Caliph spoke, he saw the flying stork circling round his head and gradually dropping toward the earth. Quickly he drew the box from his girdle, took a good pinch of the snuff, and offered one to Monsieur, who also took a pinch, and both cried together, "Mutabor!" Instantly their legs shriveled up and grew thin and red, their fine yellow slippers turned to clumsy stork's feet, their arms to wings, their necks began to sprout from between their shoulders and grew a yard long. Their beards disappeared and their bodies were covered with feathers. "You've got a fine long bill, Sir Vizier," cried the Caliph, after standing for some time, lost in astonishment. "By the beard of the Prophet, I never saw such a thing in all my life." "My very humble thanks," replied the Grand Vizier, as he bent his long neck. "But if I may venture to say so, your Highness is even handsomer as a stork than as a Caliph. But come, if it so pleases you, let us go near our comrades and find out whether we really do understand the language of storks." In the meantime, the flying stork had reached the ground. It first scraped its bill with its claw, stroked down its feathers, and then advanced toward the first stork. Now the 2 newly created storks lost no time in drawing near, and to their amazement overheard the following conversation. "Good morning, Dame Longlegs. You are out early this morning." "Yes, indeed, dear Chatterbill. I am getting myself a morsel of breakfast. May I offer you a joint of lizard or a frog's thigh? 1,000 thanks, but I really have no appetite this morning. I am here for a very different purpose. I am to dance today before my father's guests, and I have come to the meadow for a little quiet practice. Thereupon the stork began to move about with the most wonderful steps. The Caliph and Monsieur looked on in surprise, and when at last she balanced herself in a picturesque attitude on one leg and flapped her wings gracefully up and down, they could hold out no longer. A prolonged peal burst from each of their bills, and it was some time before they could recover their composure. The Caliph was the first to collect himself. "That was the funniest sight I have ever seen," said he. "It's a pity the stupid creatures were scared away by our laughter, or no doubt they would have sung next." Suddenly, however, the vizier remembered how strictly they had been warned not to laugh in their transformed state. He at once communicated his fears to the Caliph, who exclaimed, "By Mecca and Medina, it would indeed prove but a poor joke if I had to remain a stork for the remainder of my days. Do try and remember the stupid word. It has slipped my memory. We must bow 3 times eastward and say muh, muh, muh." They turned to the east and fell to bowing. Their bills touched the ground, but oh horror! The magic word was quite forgotten, and however often the Caliph bowed, and however touchingly his vizier cried "Moo, moo, moo," they could not recall it, and the unhappy Chesed and Monsieur remained storks. The 2 enchanted birds wandered sadly through the meadows. In their misery, they could not think what to do next. They could not rid themselves of their new forms. There was no use in their returning to the town and saying who they were, for who would believe a stork who announced that he was a caliph? And even if they did believe him, would the people of Baghdad consent to let a stork rule over them? The 2 idled about for several days, allaying their hunger with fruits which, however they found some difficulty in eating with their long bills. They could not acquire a taste for frogs or lizards. Their one comfort in their sad plight was that they had the power to fly, and accordingly they often flew over the roofs of Baghdad to see what was going on there. During the first few days they noticed signs of much disturbance and distress in the streets, but about the 4th day, as they sat on the roof of the palace, they perceived a splendid procession passing below them along the street. Drums and trumpets sounded. A man in a scarlet mantle embroidered in gold sat on a splendidly caparisoned horse, surrounded by richly dressed slaves. Half of Baghdad crowded after him, and all shouted, "Hail Mirza, Lord of Baghdad!" The 2 storks of the palace roof looked at each other, and Caliph Chasid said, "Can you guess now, Grand Vizier, why I have been enchanted? This Mirza is the son of my deadly enemy, the mighty magician Kashnur, who in an evil moment vowed vengeance on me. Still, I will not despair. Come with me, my faithful friend. We will go to the grave of the Prophet, and perhaps at that sacred spot the spell may be loosed." They rose from the palace roof and spread their wings toward Medina. But flying was not altogether an easy matter, for the 2 storks had had but little practice as yet. "Oh, my lord," gasped the vizier, after a couple of hours, "I can go on no longer. You really fly too quickly for me. Besides, it is nearly evening, and we would do well to find some place in which to spend the night." Chasid listened with favor to his vizier's suggestions, and perceiving in the valley beneath them a ruin which seemed to promise shelter, they flew toward it. The building in which they proposed to pass the night had apparently once been a castle. A few handsome pillars still stood among the ruins, and several rooms that still remained in fair preservation gave evidence of former splendor. Chassid and his companion wandered along the passages, seeking a dry spot, when suddenly Monsieur stood still. "My lord and master," he whispered, "if it were not absurd for a grand vizier, and still more so for a stork, to be afraid of ghosts, I should feel quite nervous, for someone or something close by me just sighed and moaned." The Caliph stopped too, and distinctly heard a low weeping sound which seemed to proceed from a human being rather than from an animal. Full of curiosity, he was about to rush toward the spot from whence the sounds of woe came, when the vizier caught him by the wing with his bill and implored him not to expose himself to fresh and unknown dangers. The Caliph, however, under whose stork's breast a brave heart beat, tore himself away, losing a few feathers, and hurried down a dark passage. He saw a door standing ajar, through which he distinctly heard sighs mingled with sobs. He pushed open the door with his bill, but remained on the threshold, astonished at the sight which met his eyes. On the floor of the ruined chamber, which was but scantily lighted by a small barred window, sat a large screech owl. Big tears rolled from its large round eyes, and in a hoarse voice it uttered its complaints through its crooked beak. As soon as it saw the Caliph and his vizier, who had crept up meanwhile, it gave vent to a joyful cry. It gently wiped the tears from its eyes with its spotted brown wings, and to the great amazement of the two visitors, addressed them in good human Arabic. "Welcome, storks. You are a good sign of my deliverance, for it was foretold me that a piece of good fortune should befall me through a stork." When the Caliph had recovered from his surprise, he drew up his feet into a graceful position, bent his long neck, and said, "O Screech Owl, from your words I am led to believe that we see in you a companion in misfortune. But alas, your hope that you may attain your deliverance through us is a vain one. You will know our helplessness when you have heard our story." The Screech Owl begged him to relate it, and the Caliph accordingly told him what we already know. When the Caliph had ended his tale, the owl thanked him and said, "Listen to my story, and know that I am no less unfortunate than yourselves. My father is the king of the Indies. I am Lusa, his only daughter. That magician, Kashnur, who enchanted you, has been the cause of my misfortunes too. He came one day to my father and demanded my hand for his son Mirza. My father, who is rather hasty, ordered him to be thrown downstairs. Not long after, the wretch managed to approach me wearing another form. One day, when I was in the garden and asked for some refreshment in the disguise of a slave, he brought me a draught that changed me at once to this horrid shape. While I was fainting with terror, he transported me here and cried in his awful voice, there shall you remain lonely and hideous, despised even by the brutes, till the end of your days, or until someone of his own free will asks you to be his wife. Thus do I avenge myself on you and your proud father. Since then, many months have passed. Sad and lonely do I live like any hermit within these walls, avoided by the world and a terror even to the animals. The beauties of nature are hidden from me, for I am blind by day, and it is only when the moon sheds her pale light on this spot that the veil falls from my eyes and I could see." The owl passed and once more wiped her eyes with her wing, for the recital of her woes had drawn fresh tears from her. The Caliph fell into deep thought on hearing this story. "If I am not mistaken," he said, "there is some mysterious connection between our misfortunes. But how to find the key to the riddle is the question." The owl answered, "O my lord, I too feel sure of this, for in my earliest youth a wise woman foretold that a stork would bring me some great happiness, and I think I could tell you how we might save ourselves." The Caliph was much surprised and asked her what she meant. "The magician comes once a month to these ruins. Not far from this room is a large hall where he is in the habit of feasting with his companions. I have often watched them. They tell each other all about their evil deeds, and possibly the magic word that you have forgotten may be mentioned." "Oh, dearest princess," exclaimed the Caliph, "tell me, when does he come, and where is the hall?" The owl paused a moment and then said, "Do not think me unkind, but I can only grant your request on one condition." "Speak, speak," cried Chasid. "Command, and I will gladly do whatever you wish." "Well," replied the owl, "you see, I should like to be free too, but this can only be if one of you will offer me his hand in marriage." The stork seemed rather taken aback by this suggestion, and the Caliph beckoned to his vizier to retire and consult with him. When they were outside the door, the Caliph said, "Grand Vizier, this is a tiresome business. However, you can take her." "Indeed," said the Vizier, "so that when I go home my wife may scratch my eyes out? Besides, I am an old man, and your Highness is still young and unmarried, and a far more suitable match for a young and lovely princess." "That's just it," sighed the Caliph, drooping his wings dejectedly. "How do you know she is young and lovely? I call it buying a pig in a poke." They argued on for some time, but at length, when the Caliph saw plainly that his vizier would rather remain a stork to the end of his days than marry the owl, he determined to fulfill the condition himself. The owl was delighted. She said that they could not have arrived at a better time, as it was likely that the magicians were meeting that very night. She then proceeded to lead the two storks to the chamber. They passed through a long, dark passage until at last a bright ray of light shone before them through the chinks of a half-ruined wall. When they reached it, the owl advised them to keep very quiet. Through the gap near which they stood, they could with ease survey the whole of the large hall. It was adorned with splendid carved pillars, and a number of colored lamps replaced the light of day. Now in the middle of the hall stood a round table covered with a variety of dishes, and about the table was a divan on which 8 men were seated. The two storks recognized one of these wicked men as the peddler who had sold the Caliph the magic powder. The man next to him begged him to relate all his latest doings, and among them the peddler told the story of the Caliph and his vizier. "And what kind of word did you give them?" asked another old sorcerer. "A very difficult Latin word. It is mutabor. As soon as the storks heard this, they was nearly beside themselves with joy. They ran at such a pace to the door of the ruined castle that the owl could scarcely keep up with them. When they reached it, the Caliph turned to the owl and said with much feeling, "Deliverer of my friend and myself, as a proof of my eternal gratitude, accept me as your husband." Then he turned toward the east. 3 times the storks bowed their long necks to the sun, which was just rising over the mountains. "Mutabor," they both cried, and in an instant they were once more transformed. In the rapture of their newly given lives, master and servant fell laughing and weeping into each other's arms. Who can describe their surprise when they at last turned around and beheld standing before them a beautiful lady, exquisitely dressed. With a smile, she held out her hand to the Caliph. "Do you not recognize your screech owl?" It was she. The Caliph was so enchanted by her grace and beauty that he declared that being turned into a stork had been the best piece of luck which had ever befallen him. The 3 set out at once for Baghdad. Fortunately, the Caliph found in his girdle not only the box with the magic powder, but also his purse. He was therefore able to buy in the nearest village all they required for their journey. And so at last they reached the gates of Baghdad. Here the Caliph's arrival created the greatest sensation. He had been given up for dead, and the people were greatly rejoiced to see their beloved ruler again. Their rage with the usurper Mirza was great in proportion. They marched in force to the palace and took the old magician and his son prisoners. The Caliph had the magician taken to the room where the princess had lived as an owl, and there had him hanged. As the son, however, knew nothing of his father's acts, the Caliph gave him his choice between death and a pinch of the magic snuff. When he chose the latter, the Grand Vizier handed him the box, one good pinch, and the magic word transformed him into a stork. The Caliph ordered to be confined in an iron cage and placed it in the palace gardens. Caliph Chasid lived long and happily with his wife, the Princess Lusa. His merriest time was when the Grand Vizier visited him in the afternoon, and when the Caliph was in particularly high spirits, he would condescend to mimic the Vizier's appearance when he had been a stork. Gravely, he would strut stiff-legged up and down the room, chattering and showing how his Vizier had vainly bowed to the east and cried, "Moo, moo, moo." The Caliph's wife and her children were always much entertained by this performance, but when the Caliph went on nodding and bowing and calling "Moo, moo, moo" too long, the Vizier would threaten laughingly to tell the good ruler's wife the subject of the discussion carried on one night outside the door of Princess Screech Owl. Now this fairy tale of old Japan is about a kind dog. It is unusual to find such a dog in Asia, even in a story, for Asian dogs are inclined to be surly and bad-tempered. Perhaps this is because they are not treated as pets. They are used as watchdogs, especially in villages, and are kept starved for that purpose. In this story, however, a small dog brings good fortune to an old couple for whom he takes the place of a child. Of course, since he is in a fairy tale, he is a magic dog, and he punishes the evil and rewards the good. This is called The Envious Neighbor. Long, long ago, an old couple lived in a village, and as they had no children to love and care for, they gave all their affection to a small dog. He was a pretty little creature, and instead of growing spoiled and disagreeable at not getting everything he wanted, as even children will do sometimes, the dog was grateful to them for their kindness and never left their side, whether they were in the house or out of it. Now one day, the old man was working in his garden with his dog, as usual, close by. The morning was hot, and at last he put down his spade and wiped his wet forehead, noticing as he did so that the animal was snuffling and scratching at a spot a little way off. There was nothing very strange in this, as all dogs are fond of scratching, and he went on quietly with his digging. The dog then ran up to his master, barking loudly, and back again to the place where he had been scratching. This he did several times until the old man wondered what could be the matter, and picking up the spade, followed where the dog had led him. Now the dog was so delighted at his success that he jumped around, barking loudly, till the noise brought the old woman out of the house. Curious to know if the dog had really found anything, the husband began to dig, and very soon the spade struck against something. He stooped down and pulled out a large box filled with shining gold pieces. The box was so heavy that the old woman had to help him carry it home, and you may guess what a supper the dog had that night. Now that he had made them rich, every day they gave him all that a dog likes best to eat, and the cushions on which he lay were fit for a prince. Now the story of the dog and his treasure soon became known, and a neighbor whose garden was next door to the old people's grew so envious of their good luck that he could neither eat nor sleep. Now, as the dog had discovered a treasure once, this foolish man thought he must be able to discover one always, and he begged the old couple to lend him their pet for a little while, so that he might be made rich also. How can you ask such a thing? Answered the old man indignantly. You know how much we love him, and that he is never out of our sight for 5 minutes. But the envious neighbor would not heed his words, and came daily with the same request, until at last the old people, who could not bear to say no to anyone, promised to lend the dog just for a night or two. No longer did the man get hold of the dog than he turned him into the garden, but the dog did nothing but race about, and the man was forced to wait with what patience he could. At night, he took the dog into the house, and the next morning the man opened the house door, and the dog bounded joyfully into the garden, running up to the foot of a tree, began to scratch wildly. The man called loudly to his wife to bring a spade and followed the dog, for he longed to catch the first glimpse of the expected treasure. But when he had dug up the ground, what did he find? Why, nothing but a parcel of old bones, which smelled so bad that he could not stay there a moment longer. His heart was filled with rage against the dog who had played him this trick, and he seized a pickaxe and killed him on the spot before he knew what he was doing. When he remembered that he would have to go with his story to the old man and his wife, he was frightened. But there was nothing to be gained by putting it off. So he pulled a very long face and went to his neighbor's garden. Your dog, he said, pretending to weep, had suddenly fallen down dead. Though I took every care of him and gave him everything he could wish for, and I thought I had better come straight and tell you. Weeping bitterly, the old man went to fetch the body of his pet, and brought it home and buried it under the fig tree where he had found the treasure. From morning till night, he and his wife mourned over their loss, and nothing could comfort them. At length, one night when he was asleep, he dreamed that the dog appeared to him and told him to cut down the fig tree over his grave and out of its wood to make a mortar. But when the old man woke and thought of his dream, he did not feel at all inclined to cut down the tree, which bore abundant fruit every year. So he consulted his wife. The woman did not hesitate a moment. She said that after what had happened before, the dog's advice must certainly be obeyed. So the tree was felled and a beautiful mortar made from it. Now when the season came for the rice crop to be gathered, the mortar was taken down from its shelf and the grains placed in it for pounding. Lo and behold, in the twinkling of an eye, they turned into gold pieces. At the sight of all this gold, the hearts of the old people were glad, and once more they blessed their faithful dog. It was not long before this story also came to the ears of their envious neighbor, and he lost no time in going to the old people and asking if they happened to have a mortar that they could lend him. The old man did not at all like parting with his precious treasure, but he never could say no. So the neighbor went off with the mortar under his arm. The moment he got into his house, he took a great handful of rice and began to shell off the husks with the help of his wife. But instead of the gold pieces for which they had hoped, the rice turned into berries, with such a horrible smell that they were obliged to run away. But only after they had smashed the mortar in a rage and set fire to the bits. The old people next door were naturally very much put out when they learned the fate of their mortar, and were not at all comforted by the explanations and excuses made by their neighbor. But that night the dog again appeared in a dream to his master and told him that he must go and collect the ashes of the burned mortar and bring them home. When the great Manchu, to whom this part of the country belonged, was expected at the capital, the old man was to carry the ashes to the high road through which the procession would have to pass. And as soon as it was in sight, he was to climb up all the cherry trees, one by one, and sprinkle ashes on them. And they would soon blossom as they had never blossomed before. This time the old man did not wait to consult his wife as to whether we should do what his dog had told him. Directly he got up, he went to his neighbor's house and collected the ashes of the burned mortar. He put them carefully in a china vase and carried it to the high road, sitting down by the roadside until the Manchu should pass. The cherry trees were bare, for it was the season when small pots of twigs were sold to rich people, who kept them indoors so that they might blossom early and beautify their rooms. As to the trees along the road, no one would ever think of looking for the tiniest bud for more than a month yet. The old man had not been waiting long before he saw a cloud of dust in the far distance, and knew that it must be the procession of the Manchu. On they came, every man dressed in his finest clothes, and the crowd lining the road bowed their faces to the ground as the procession went by. Now only the old man did not bow, and the great lord saw this in anger, bade one of his courtiers demand why he had disobeyed the ancient customs. But before the messenger could reach him, the old man had climbed the nearest tree and scattered ashes far and wide. In an instant the white flowers flashed into life. The heart of the Manchu rejoiced at the sight, and he gave rich presents to the old man, whom he bade come to his castle. We may be sure that in a very little while the envious neighbor heard this also, and again his bosom was filled with envy. He hastened to the place where he had burned the mortar, collected a few of the ashes which the old man had left behind, and took them to the road, hoping that his luck might be as good as the old man's, or perhaps even better. His heart beat with pleasure when he caught the first glimpses of the Manchu's train, and he held himself ready for the right moment. As the Manchu drew near, he flung a great handful of ashes over the trees. Alas, no buds or flowers followed his action. Instead, the ashes were all blown back into the eyes of the Manchu and his warriors until they cried out in pain. Then the Manchu ordered the evildoer to be seized and bound and thrown into prison, where he was kept for many months. Now by the time he was set free, everybody in his native village had found out his wickedness, and they would not let him live there any longer. As he would not leave off his evil ways, he soon went from bad to worse, and came to a miserable end. All right. In an eastern world, especially if it is tropical, the three enemies are the crocodile that hides under the waters of sluggish rivers, the serpent that hangs its deadly length from a tree or lies in the dust where a bare foot can catch its fang, and the starving wild dog that goes mad and turns on a human being. They are indeed the three fates, and in this Egyptian story of the prince and the three fates, the kingly father does well to guard his child. Yet the gentle touch is here in the beguiling ways of a small dog and a small boy, even though he is a prince, and it is this that gives the story its charm. And this is The Prince and the Three Fates. Now, once upon a time, a little boy was born to a king who ruled over a great country through which ran a wide river. The king was nearly beside himself with joy, for he had always longed for a son to inherit his crown. and he sent messages to invite all the most powerful fairies to come and see this wonderful baby. Now, in an hour or two, so many were gathered round the cradle that the child seemed in danger of being smothered. The king, who was watching the fairies eagerly, was disturbed to see them looking grave. "Is there anything the matter?" he asked anxiously. The fairies all shook their heads at once. "He is a beautiful boy, and it is a great pity. But what is to happen will happen," they said. "It is written in the books of fate that he must die, either by a crocodile or a serpent or a dog. If we could save him, we would, but it is beyond our power." And so saying, they vanished. For a time, the king stood motionless, horror-stricken at what he had heard. But when being of a hopeful nature, he began at once to invent plans to save the prince from the dreadful doom that awaited him. He instantly sent for his master builder and bade him construct a strong castle on the top of a mountain, which should be fitted with the most precious things from the king's own palace, and every kind of toy a child could wish to play with. Besides this, he gave the strictest orders that a guard should walk round the castle night and day. For 4 or 5 years the child lived in the castle alone with his nurses, taking his airings on the broad terraces, which were surrounded by walls with a moat beneath them, and only a drawbridge to connect them with the outer world. One day, when he was old enough to run quite fast by himself, he looked from the terrace across the moat and saw a little soft fluffy ball of a dog jumping and playing on the other side. Now, of course, all dogs had been kept from him for fear that the fairy's prophecy should come true, and he had never even beheld one before. He turned to the page who was walking behind him. "What is that funny little thing running so fast over there?" "That is a dog, Prince," answered the page. "Well, bring me one like it, and we will see which can run the faster." And he watched the dog till it had disappeared round the corner. The page was much puzzled as to what to do. He had strict orders to refuse the prince nothing. Yet he remembered the prophecy and felt this was a serious matter. At last he thought he had better tell the king the whole story and let him decide the question. "Oh, get him a dog if he wants one," said the king. He will only cry his heart out if he does not have it." So a puppy was found, exactly like the other. They might have been twins, and perhaps they were. Now years went by, and the boy and the dog played together till the boy grew tall and strong. The time came at last when he sent a message to his father. "Why do you keep me shut up here doing nothing?" he asked. "I know all about the prophecy that was made at my birth, but I would far rather be killed at once than live an idle, useless life here. So give me arms and let me go, I pray you, together with my dog." And again the king listened to his wishes, and he and his dog were carried in a ship to the other side of the river, which was so broad here it might almost have been the sea. A black horse was waiting for him, tied to a tree, and he mounted and rode away wherever his fancy took him. The dog, always at his heels, never was any prince so happy as he, and he rode and rode till at length he came to the king's palace. The king who lived here did not care about ruling his country well or seeing that his people lived cheerfully and contented lives. Instead, he spent his whole time in making riddles and inventing plans which he had much better have let alone. At the time when the young prince reached the kingdom, this ruler had just completed a wonderful house for his only child, a daughter. It had 70 windows, each 70 feet from the ground, and he had sent the royal herald round the borders of the neighboring kingdoms to proclaim that whoever could climb up the walls to the window of the princess should win her for his wife. The fame of the princess's beauty had spread far and wide, and there was no lack of princes who wished to try their fortune. The palace, must have looked very funny each morning with the dabs of different colors on the white marble as the princes kept climbing up the walls. But although some managed to get farther than others, nobody has as yet got near the top. So down they went and up again next morning. They had already been spending several days in these futile attempts when the young prince arrived. And as he was pleasant to look upon and civil to talk to, they welcomed him to the house which had been put at their disposal, and saw that his bath was properly perfumed after his long journey. "Where do you come from?" they said at last, "and whose son are you?" Well, the young prince had reasons for keeping his own secret. "My father was master of the horse to the king of my country," he replied, "and after my mother died he married again. At first all went well, but as soon as she had babies of her own, she hated me, and I fled lest she should do me harm." The hearts of the other young men were touched when they heard this story, and they did everything they could think of to make him forget his past sorrows. "What are you doing here?" the youth asked them one day. "We spend our whole time climbing up the walls of the palace, trying to reach the windows of the princess," one young man answered. "But as yet no one has reached within 10 feet of them." "Let me try too," cried the prince. "But tomorrow I will wait and see what you do before I begin." The next day he stood where he could watch the young men climb the wall, and he noted the places that seemed most difficult, and made up his mind that when his turn came he would go up some other way. Day after day he observed the suitors until one morning he felt that he knew the plan of the walls by heart, and he took his place with the others. Thanks to what he had learned from their failures, he managed to grasp one little rough projection after another, until at last, to the envy of his friends, he stood on the sill of the princess's window. Looking up from below, they saw a white hand stretched forth to draw him in. Then one of the young men ran straight to the king's palace. "The wall has been climbed and the prize is won," he cried. "By whom?" the king demanded, starting up from his throne. "Which of the princes may I claim as my son-in-law?" "The youth who succeeded in climbing to the princess's window is not a prince at all," answered the young man. "He is the son of the master of the horse to the great king who dwells across the river, and he fled from his own country to escape from the hatred of his stepmother." At this news the king was very angry, for it had never entered his head that anyone but a prince would seek to woo his daughter. "Let him go back to the land whence he came," he shouted in wrath. "Does he expect me to give my daughter to an exile?" And he began to smash the drinking vessels in his fury. Indeed, he quite frightened the young man, who ran hastily back to his friends and told the youth what the king had said. Now the princess, who was leaning from her window, heard his words and bade the messenger go back to her father and tell him that she had sworn a vow never to eat or drink again if the youth were taken from her. The king was angrier than ever when he received this message, and he ordered his guards to go at once to the palace and put the successful wooer to death. But the princess threw herself between him and his would-be murderers. "Lay a finger on him, and I shall be dead before sunset," said she. As they saw that she meant it, they left the palace and carried the tale to her father. By this time the king's anger was dying away, and he began to consider what his people would think of him if he broke his promise. He ordered the princess to be brought before him, and the young man also. And when they entered the throne room, he was so pleased with the noble air of the victor that his wrath altogether melted away. He ran to him and embraced him. "Tell me who you are," he said, when he had recovered himself a little, "for I will never believe that you have no royal blood in your veins." The prince still had his reasons for being silent, however, and he only told the same story. The king had taken such a fancy to the youth that he said no more. The marriage took place the following day, and of great herds of cattle, and a large estate were given to the young couple. Several weeks later, the prince said to his wife, "My life is in the hands of three creatures, a crocodile, a serpent, and a dog." "Ah, how rash you are," cried the princess, throwing her arms around his neck. "If you know that, how can you have that horrid beast about you? I will give orders to have him killed at once." But the prince would not listen to her. "Kill my dear little dog, who has been my playfellow since he was a puppy," he exclaimed. "Oh, never will I allow that." And all that the princess could get from him was that he would always wear a sword and have somebody with him when he left the palace. When the prince and princess had been married a few months, the prince heard that his father was old and ill and longing to have his son by his side again. The young man could not remain deaf to such a message, and he took a tender farewell of his wife and set out on his journey home. It was a long way, and he was forced to rest often on the road, and so it happened that one night, when he was sleeping in a city on the banks of the great river, a huge crocodile came silently up and made its way along a passage to the prince's room. Fortunately, one of his guards woke up as it was trying to steal past them and shut the crocodile up in a large hall, where a giant watched over it, never leaving the spot except during the night when the crocodile slept. This went on for more than a month. For when the prince found that he was not likely to leave his father's kingdom again, he sent for his wife and bade the messenger tell her that he would await her coming in the city on the banks of the great river. The longer he delayed in the city, the greater the danger of his being eaten one day by the crocodile. During the weeks that followed, the prince amused himself as best he could, although he counted the minutes to the arrival of the princess. When at last she came, he at once prepared to start for the court. That very night, however, while he was asleep, the princess noticed a dark patch in a corner of the room. As she looked, it seemed to grow longer and longer, and to be moving slowly toward the cushions on which the prince was lying. She shrank in terror, and the thing heard and raised its head attentively at the slight noise. Then she saw it was the long, flat head of a serpent, and she remembered the prophecy. Without waking her husband, she glided out of bed, and taking up a heavy bowl of milk, which stood on a table, placed it on the floor in the path of the serpent, for she knew that no serpent in the world can resist milk. She held her breath as the snake drew near and watched it raise its head again, as if it was smelling something delicious, while its forked tongue darted out greedily. At length its eyes fell on the milk, and in an instant it was lapping it so fast that it was a wonder the creature did not choke, for it never took its head from the bowl as long as a drop was left. After that it dropped on the ground and slept heavily. This was what the princess had been waiting for. And taking up her husband's sword, she severed the snake's head from its body. Now the morning after this adventure, the prince and princess set out for the king's palace, but found, when they reached it, that he was already dead. They gave him a magnificent burial. Then the prince had to examine the new laws that had been made in his absence, and take care of many affairs of state besides, until he grew quite ill from fatigue and was obliged to go away to one of his palaces on the banks of the river in order to rest. Here he soon recovered and again began to hunt and to shoot wild duck with his bow, and wherever he went, his dog, now grown very old, went with him. One morning, the prince and his dog were out hunting as usual, and while chasing their game, they drew near the river bank. The prince was running at full speed after his dog when he almost fell over something lying in his path that looked like a log. To his surprise, a voice spoke to him, and he saw that the thing he had taken for a log was really a crocodile. "You cannot escape me," he heard it say, when he had gathered his senses again. "I am your fate, and wherever you go and whatever you do, you will always find me before you. There is only one way to shake off my power. If you can dig a pit in the dry sand, which will remain full of water, my spell will be broken. If not, death will come to you speedily. I give you this one chance. Now go." The young man walked sadly away, and when he reached the palace, he shut himself in his room, and for the rest of the day, refused to see anyone, even his wife. At sunset, however, when there was still no sound through his door, the princess grew frightened and made such a noise that the prince was forced to draw back the bolt and let her come in. "How pale you look," she cried. "Are you hurt? Tell me, I pray you, what is the matter, for perhaps I can help." The prince told her the whole story, including the impossible task given him by the crocodile. "How can a sand hole remain full of water?" he asked. "Of course, it will all run through." The crocodile called it a chance, but he might as well have dragged me into the river at once. He said truly that I cannot escape him. "Oh, if that is all," cried the princess, "I can set you free myself, for my fairy godmother taught me to know the use of plants, and in the desert, not far from here, there grows a little four-leaved herb which will keep the water in the pit for a whole year. I will go in search of it at dawn, and you can begin to dig the hole as soon as you like." To comfort her husband, the princess had spoken lightly and gaily, but she knew very well she had no light task before her. Still, she was full of courage and energy, and determined that one way or another her husband should be saved. It was still starlight when she left the palace on a snow-white donkey and rode away from the river straight to the west. For some time she could see nothing before her but a flat waste of sand, which became hotter and hotter as the sun rose higher and higher. A dreadful thirst seized her and the donkey both, but there was no stream to quench it, and if there had been, she would hardly have had time to stop, for she still had far to go and must be back before evening, else the crocodile might declare that the prince had not fulfilled his conditions. She spoke cheering words to her donkey, who brayed in reply, and the two pushed steadily on. Oh, how glad they both were when they caught sight of a steep rock in the distance. They forgot that they were thirsty and that the sun was hot. The ground seemed to fly under their feet until the donkey stopped of its own accord in the cool shadow. But although the donkey could rest, the princess could not, for the plant, as she knew, grew on the very top of the rock, and a wide chasm ran round its foot. Luckily, she had brought a rope with her, and making a noose at one end, she flung it across with all her might. The first time it slid back slowly into the ditch, and she had to draw it up and throw it again. But at last the noose caught on something. The princess could not see what, and she had to trust her whole weight to this little bridge, which might snap and let her fall deep down among the rocks. In that case, her death was as certain as that of the prince. But nothing so dreadful happened. Now the princess got safely to the other side, then came to the worst part of her task. As fast as she put her foot on a ledge of the rock, the stone broke away from under her and left her in the same place as before. Meanwhile, the hours were passing, and it was nearly noon. The heart of the poor princess was filled with despair, but she would not give up the struggle. She looked round until she saw a small stone above her that seemed rather stronger than the rest. And by only poising her foot lightly on those that lay between, she managed by a great effort, her hands now torn and bleeding, to reach the top. But here such a violent wind was blowing that she was almost blinded by the dust. She had to throw herself on the ground and feel about for the precious herb. For a few terrible moments she thought that the rock was bare and that her journey had been to no purpose. Feel where she would, there was nothing but grit and stones. Suddenly her fingers touched something soft in a crevice. It was a plant. That was clear, but was it the right one? See, she could not, for the wind was blowing more fiercely than ever. So she lay where she was and counted the leaves. 1, 2, 3. Yes, yes. There were 4. Plucking a leaf cluster, she held it safe in her hand while she turned, almost blown away by the wind, to go down the rock. Now when once she was safely over the side, all became still in a moment, and she slid down the rock so fast that it was only a wonder that she did not land in the chasm. By good luck, however, she stopped quite close to her rope bridge and was soon across it. Now the donkey brayed joyfully at the sight of her and set off home at his best speed, never seeming to know that the earth under his feet was nearly as hot as the sun above him. Now on the bank of the great river he halted, and the princess rushed up to where the prince was standing by the pit he had dug in the dry sand with a huge water pot beside it. A little way off, the crocodile lay blinking in the sun, his yellow-white jaws wide open and showing his sharp teeth. At a signal from the princess, the prince poured the water in the hole, and the moment it reached the brim, the princess flung in the 4-leaf plant. Would the charm work, or would the water trickle away slowly through the sand, and the prince fall a victim to that horrible monster? For half an hour they stood with their eyes rooted to the spot, but the hole remained as full as at the beginning, with the little green leaf floating on top. Then the prince turned with a shout of triumph, and the crocodile sulkily plunged into the river. The prince had escaped forever the second of his 3 fates. He stood there looking after the crocodile and rejoicing that he was free, when he was startled by a wild duck which flew past them, seeking shelter among the rushes that bordered the edge of the stream. In another instant his dog dashed by in hot pursuit and knocked heavily against his master's legs. The prince staggered, lost his balance, and fell backwards into the river, where the mud and the rushes caught him and held him fast. He shrieked for help to his wife, who came running, luckily bringing her rope with her. The poor old dog was drowned, but the prince was pulled to shore. "My wife," he said, "has been stronger than my fate." All right. In this fairy tale of old Japan, a young samurai or warrior falls in love with a beautiful peasant girl. It is evident that she is no ordinary person, for she has all the charm and the grace of a princess. She is not, however, a princess. In some mysterious fashion, her soul is the soul of a willow tree. Though she loves the young man, and their love, after many trials, involves a happy marriage, yet the end is well. It is unusual for a fairy tale, since fairy tales, as a rule, have happy endings. This is the story of a yogi. Now, in the era of Bomai, there was a young samurai called Tomotada in the service of Takayama Yoshimune, the lord of Noto. Now, Tomotada was a native of Echizen, and at an early age he had been taken as a page into the palace of the daimyo of Noto, where he was educated under the supervision of that prince for the profession of arms. Now, as he grew into manhood, he proved himself both a good scholar and a good soldier, and he continued to enjoy the favor of his prince. Being gifted with an amiable character, a winning manner, and a handsome appearance, he was admired and liked by his samurai comrades. Now, when Tomotada was about 20 years old, he was sent upon a private mission to Hosokawa Masamoto, the great daimyo of Kyoto, a kinsman of Hatakeyama Yoshimune. Since he had been ordered to journey through Echizen, the youth requested permission to pay a visit on the way to his widowed mother. It was the coldest period of the year when he started. The country was covered with snow, and though mounted on a powerful horse, he had to proceed slowly. The road which he followed passed through a mountain district where the settlements were few and far between. And on the second day of his journey, after a weary ride of many hours, he was dismayed to find that he could not reach his intended stopping place until late in the night. He had reason to be anxious, for a heavy snowstorm came on with an intensely cold wind, and the horse showed signs of exhaustion. Suddenly he perceived the thatched roof of a cottage on the summit of a nearby hill where willow trees were growing. He urged his tired animal on until they reached the dwelling, and he knocked loudly on the storm doors, which had been closed against the wind. An old woman opened them and cried out compassionately at the sight of the handsome stranger. "Ah, young gentleman, traveling alone in such terrible weather. Come in, young master, please enter." Tomotada dismounted and, after leading his horse to a shed in the rear, entered the cottage, where he saw an old man and a girl warming themselves by a fire of bamboo splints. They respectfully invited him to approach the fire, and the old couple then proceeded to make some tea and prepare food for the traveler, whom they then ventured to question in regard to his journey. Now, meanwhile, the young girl disappeared behind a screen. Tomotada had observed with astonishment that she was extremely beautiful, though her attire was the most wretched kind, and her long, loose hair in disorder. He wondered that so lovely a girl should be living in such a miserable and lonely place. The old man said to him, "Honored sir, the next village is far, and the snow is falling thickly. The wind is piercing, and the road is very bad. To proceed further this night would probably be dangerous. Although this hovel is unworthy of your presence, and although we have few comforts to offer, perhaps it would be safer to remain tonight under this miserable roof. We will take good care of your horse." Now Tomotada accepted this humble proposal, secretly glad of the chance thus afforded him to see more of the young girl. Presently, a coarse but ample meal was set before him, and the girl came from behind the screen to serve the tea. She was now clad in a rough but clean robe of homespun, and her long, loose hair was neatly combed and smoothed. As she bent forward to fill his cup, Tomotada perceived that she was incomparably more beautiful than any woman he had ever seen, and there was a grace about her every motion that astonished him. The elders began to apologize for her, saying, "Sir, our daughter Ayogi has been brought up here in the mountains almost alone, and she knows nothing of gentle service. We pray that you will pardon her stupidity and her ignorance." Tomotada protested that he deemed himself lucky to be waited upon by a comely maiden. He could not turn his eyes away from her, though he saw that his admiring gaze made her blush. He left the tea and food untasted before him. "Kind sir," the mother said, "we very much hope that you will try to eat and to drink a little, although our peasant fare is of the worst, as you must have been chilled by that piercing wind." To please the old couple, Tomotada ate and drank, but he was aware only of the charm of the blushing girl. He talked with her and found that her speech was as sweet as her face. Brought up in the mountains she might have been, but her parents must at some time have been persons of high degree, for she spoke and moved like a lady of rank. Suddenly he addressed her in poetic terms, which also veiled a question, inspired by the delight in his heart. "While on my way to pay a visit, I found something I took to be a flower. Therefore, here I spend the day. But why in the darkness long before dawn, the dawn blush tint should glow? That indeed I do not know. I do not know." Without a moment's hesitation, she answered him in words. "If with my sleeve I hide the faint fair color of the dawning sun, then perhaps in the morning my lord will remain." Now Tomotada knew that she accepted his admiration, and he was scarcely less surprised by the art with which she had uttered her feelings than delighted by the assurance which the words conveyed. He was certain that in all this world he could not hope to meet, much less to win, a girl more beautiful and witty than this rustic maid before him. A voice in his heart seemed to cry out urgently, Take the luck that the gods have put in your way. In short, he was bewitched, and to such a degree that without further preliminary, he asked the old people to give him their daughter in marriage, telling them at the same time his name and lineage and his rank in the train of the Lord of Noto. They bowed down before him with many exclamations of grateful astonishment, but after some moments of apparent hesitation, the father replied, "Honored master, you are a person of high position, and likely to rise to still higher things. Too great is the favor that you deign to offer us. Indeed, the depth of our gratitude, therefore, is not to be spoken or measured. Yet it would be improper for this girl of ours, a stupid country girl of vulgar birth, and with no training or teaching of any sort, to become the wife of a noble samurai. Even to speak of such a matter is not right. Nevertheless, since you find the girl to your liking and have consented to pardon her peasant manners and to overlook her great rudeness, we do greatly present her to you for your humble handmaiden. Deign, therefore, to treat her according to your august pleasure." By morning the storm had passed, and day broke through a cloudless east. Even if the sleeve of Aogi hid from her lover's eyes the rose blush of that dawn, he could no longer tarry. Yet neither could he resign himself to parting with the girl. When everything had been prepared for his journey, he addressed her parents. "Though it may seem thankless to ask for more than I have already received, I must once again beg you to give me your daughter to be my wife, as she is willing to accompany me, if you permit. I can take her with me as she is. If you will give her to me, I shall ever cherish you as parents, and in the meantime, please accept this poor acknowledgment of your kindest hospitality." So saying, he placed before his humble host a purse filled with gold. The old man, after many protestations, gently pushed back the gift. "Kind master," he said, "the gold would be of no use to us, and you will probably have need of it during your long, cold journey. Here we buy nothing, and we could not spend so much money on ourselves even if we wished. As for the girl, we have already bestowed her as a free gift. She belongs to you. Therefore, it is not necessary to ask our leave to take her away. Already, she has told us that she hopes to accompany you and to remain your servant as long as you may be willing to endure her presence. We are only too happy to know that you deign to accept her, and we pray that you will not trouble yourself on our account. In this place, we could not provide her with proper clothing, much less with a dowry. Moreover, being old, we should in any event have had to separate from her before long. It is very fortunate that you should be willing to take her with you now." It was in vain that Tomotada tried to persuade the old people to accept the present. He found that they cared nothing for money, and he saw that they were really anxious to entrust their daughter's fate to his hands. He decided to take her with him, and lifting her up on his horse, he bade the old people farewell for the time being with many expressions of gratitude. "Honored sir," the father made answer, "it is we and not you who have reason for gratitude. We are sure that you will be kind to our girl, and we have no fears for her sake." Now, a samurai was not allowed to marry without the consent of his lord, and Tomotada could not expect to obtain this sanction before his mission had been accomplished. He had no reason under such circumstances to fear that the beauty of Aogi might attract dangerous attention, and that means might be devised of taking her away from him. Now in Kyoto, therefore, he tried to keep her hidden from curious eyes, but a retainer of the Lord Hosokawa one day caught sight of Aogi, discovered her relation to Tomotada, and reported the matter to the daimyo. Thereupon the daimyo, a young prince found of pretty faces, gave orders that the girl should be brought to the palace, and she was taken there at once without ceremony. Tomotada sorrowed deeply, but he knew he was powerless. He was only a humble messenger in the service of a far-off daimyo, and for the time being, he was at the mercy of a much more powerful baron, whose wishes were not to be questioned. Moreover, Tomotada knew that he had acted foolishly, that he had brought about his own misfortune by entering into a relationship which the code of the military class condemned. There was now but one hope for him, a desperate hope, that Aogi might be able to escape and flee with him. After long reflection, he resolved to try to send her a letter. The attempt would be dangerous, of course. Any writing sent to her might find its way to the hands of the daimyo, and to send a love letter to any resident of the palace was an unpardonable offense. He resolved to dare the risk, however, and he composed his letter in the form of a Chinese poem. The poem was written with only 28 characters, but with those 28 characters, he was able to express all the depth of his feelings and to suggest all the pain of his loss. Now, on the evening of the day after his poem had been sent, Tomotada was summoned to appear before the Lord Hosokawa. The youth at once suspected that his confidence had been betrayed, and he would not hope, if his letter had been seen by the daimyo, to escape the severest penalty. Now he will order my death, thought Tomotada, but I do not care to live unless Aogi is restored to me. On entering the presence room, he saw the Lord Hosokawa seated upon a throne, surrounded by samurai of high rank in ceremonial caps and robes. All were silent as statues, and while Tomotada advanced to make obeisance, the hush seemed to him sinister and heavy, like the stillness before a storm. But Hosokawa suddenly descended from the throne and, taking the youth by the arm, said, "Because you love each other so much, I have taken it upon myself to authorize your marriage in lieu of my kinsman, the Lord of Noto, and your wedding shall now be celebrated before me. The guests are assembled, the gifts are ready." At a signal from the Lord, the sliding screens concealing a further apartment were pushed open, and Tomotada saw there many dignitaries of the court assembled for the ceremony, and Aogi awaiting him in her bridal apparel. Thus was she given back to him, and the wedding was joyous and splendid, and precious gifts were made to the young couple by the daimyo and the members of his household. For 5 happy years after the wedding, Tomotada and Aogi dwelt together. But one morning, Aogi, while talking with her husband about some household matter, suddenly uttered a great cry of pain, and then became very white and still. After a few moments, she said in a feeble voice, "Pardon me for thus rudely crying out, but the pain was so sudden. My dear husband, our union must have been brought about through some karma relation in a former state of existence, and that happy relation, I think, will bring us together again in more than one life to come. But for our present existence, the relation is now ended. We are about to be separated. Repeat for me, I beseech you, the Nembutsu prayer, because I am dying." "Oh, what strange wild fancies," cried the startled husband. "You are only a little unwell, my dear one. Lie down for a while and rest, and the sickness will pass." "No, no," she insisted. "I am dying. I do not imagine it, I know. And it is needless now, my dear husband, to hide the truth from you any longer. I am not a human being. The soul of a tree is my soul. The heart of a tree is my heart. The sap of the willow is my life, and someone at this cruel moment is cutting down my tree. That is why I must die. Even to weep is beyond my strength. Quickly, quickly, repeat the Nembutsu for me. Quickly, ah!" With another cry of pain, she turned aside her beautiful head and tried to hide her face behind her sleeve. But almost in the same moment, her whole form appeared to collapse in the strangest way and to sink down, 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 level with the floor. Tomotada had sprung to support her, but there was nothing to support. There lay on the matting only the empty robes of the fair creature and the ornaments she had worn in her hair. The body had ceased to exist. Tomotada shaved his head, took the Buddhist vows, and became a priest. He traveled through all the provinces of the empire, and at all the holy places which he visited, he offered up prayers for the soul of Aogi. Reaching Echizen in the course of his pilgrimage, he sought the home of the parents of his beloved. But when he arrived at the lonely place among the hills where their dwelling had been, he found that the cottage had disappeared. There was nothing to mark even the spot where it had stood, except the stumps of 3 willows, 2 old trees, and 1 young tree that had been cut down long before his arrival. Beside the stumps of these willow trees, he erected a memorial tomb and performed holy services on behalf of the spirits of Aogi and her parents. Alright, this tale is reminiscent of the death of Koshai, the Deathless. For many of the same elements have traveled from Russia to assume Turkish form. The old king has become a padishah. His 3 daughters are claimed by a lion, a tiger, and a formidable bird, instead of the Russian falcon, eagle, and raven. And the magical adventures have taken on southern variations. But there is the same curious mingling of the natural forces of life itself, of beast and man, of wind and storm. And it is still the story of a young prince who forces his intrepid way through perils and marvels to the happy ending, in which he finds his beautiful princess, and their lives are full of joy until the day of their death. This here's the story of the Wind Demon. There was once, pardon me, there was once upon a time an old padishah who had 3 sons and 3 daughters. One day the old man fell ill, and although they called all the physicians together to help him, his disease would not take a turn for the better. I already belong to death, he thought. And calling to him his sons and daughters, he addressed them. If I die, he among you shall be padishah, who watches all night long at my tomb. As for my daughters, I give them to whoever first comes to woo them. With that, he died and was buried, as became a padishah. Now, as the realm could have a padishah in no other way, the eldest son went to his father's tomb and sat there for half the night in his prayers on his carpet and waited dawn. All at once, a horrible din arose in the midst of the darkness, and so frightened was he that he snatched up his slippers and never stopped till he got home. The next night, the middle son went to the tomb, and he also sat there for half the night, but no sooner did he hear the great din that he too caught up his slippers and hurried off homeward. The third son, Prince Mehmed, now took his turn. He thrust his sword in his girdle and went off to the tomb. At midnight, sure enough, he heard the horrible din, and so horrible was it that the very earth trembled. The youth pulled himself together, went straight toward the spot from which the noise came loudest, and there in front of him stood a huge dragon. Drawing his sword, the youth fell upon the dragon so furiously that at last the monster had scarcely strength enough left to speak. If you are a man, it said, put your heel upon me and strike me with your sword once more. Then the padishah's son, with one terrific blow, killed the dragon. He would then have cut off the beast's ears and nose to keep as proof that he had remained at the tomb all night long. But the moon disappeared behind the clouds, and he could not see very well in the dark. He began groping about for the dragon's ears and nose, when all at once he saw in the distance a little shining light. He went straight toward it, hoping to borrow the light, and there in the midst of the brightness he saw an old man. 2 globes were in his hand, one black and the other white. The black globe he was turning round and round, and from the white globe came the light. What are you doing, old father? Asked the padishah's son. Alas, my son, replied the old man, my business is my bane. I hold fast the nights and let go the days. Alas, father, replied the Padishah's son, my task is even greater than yours. I must hold back the dawn. With that, he tied together the old man's arms so that he could not let go. He could not let the days go, and it would remain night. Then he went on still farther to seek a light. He went on and on until he came to the foot of a castle wall, where 40 men were taking counsel together beneath it. What is the matter? Inquired the Padishah's son. We should like to go into the castle to steal the treasure this very night, said the 40 men, but we do not know how. I would very soon help you if you only gave me a little light, said the Padishah's son. This the robber steadily promised to do, and after that he took a packet of nails, knocked them into the castle wall, row after row, right up to the top, clambered up himself, and then shouted down to them, Now you come up, one by one, just as I have done. The robbers caught hold of the nails and began to clamber up, one after another, the whole 40 of them. But the youth was not idle. He drew his sword, and the moment each one reached the top, he chopped off his head and pitched his body into the courtyard. And so he did to the whole 40. Then he leaped down into the courtyard himself, and there before him was a beautiful palace. No sooner had he opened the door than a serpent glided past him and crawled up a column close by the staircase. The youth drew his sword to strike the serpent. He struck and cut the serpent in two, but his sword remained stuck in the stone wall, and he could not draw it out again. Then he mounted the staircase and went into a room, and there a lovely damsel lay asleep. He went out again, closed the door very softly behind him, and ascending to the second flight, he went into another room, and before him slept a still lovelier damsel on a bed. This door he also closed, and went up to the third and topmost flight, and opened a door there also, and lo, the whole room was filled with gold. And such a splendid damsel lay asleep there that if the Padishah's son had had 1,000 hearts, he would have loved her with them all. This door he also closed, remounted the castle wall, descended again on the other side by means of the nails, which he took out one by one as he descended, and so reached the ground again. Then he went straight up to the old man whose arms he had tied together. "Oh, my son," cried the old man from afar, "you have remained away a long time. Everybody's side will be aching from so much lying down." Then the youth untied his arms. The old man let the white globes of day move around again, and daylight appeared. The youth went up to the dragon, cut off its ears and nose with his dagger, and put them in his knapsack. After this he went back to the palace, where he found that they had made his eldest brother Padishah. However, since he himself was not ready to rule yet, he let it be and said nothing. Not very long afterward, a lion came to the palace and went straight up to the Padishah. "What do you want?" asked the Padishah. "I want your eldest sister for my wife," replied the lion. "I do not give my sister to a brute beast," said the Padishah. The servants began chasing the lion away, but now the Padishah's youngest brother appeared and said, "Such was not our father's will. He said we were to give her to whosoever asked for her." With that, they brought the damsel and gave her to the lion, and he took her and was gone. Now the next day came a tiger and demanded the middle daughter from the Padishah. The two elder brothers would by no means give her up, but again the youngest brother insisted that they should do so, as it was their father's wish. So they sent for the damsel and gave her to the tiger. On the third day a bird alighted in the palace and said that he must have the youngest of the Padishah's daughters. The Padishah and the second brother were again unwilling to agree, but the youngest brother insisted that the bird ought to be allowed to fly back with his sister. Now this bird was really the Padishah of the birds, the emerald Anka. But let us see what happened in the castle of which we have before spoken. For in this castle there dwelt a Padishah and his 3 daughters. Rising from his bed one morning, he went out into the courtyard and saw a serpent cut in two on the staircase and a sword sticking in the stone column. And going on still farther and searching in all directions, he perceived the bodies of the 40 robbers in his castle moat. Not an enemy, but only the hand of a friend could have done this, he thought. And he has saved me from the robbers and the serpent. The sword is my good friend's, but where is the sword's master? And he took counsel with his vizier. Oh, we'll soon get to the bottom of that, said the vizier. Let us make a great pool and invite everyone to come and bathe in it. We will carefully watch every single man, and whosoever has a sheath without a sword will be the man who has saved us. This the Padishah did. He made ready a great pool, and the whole realm came and bathed in it. Next day the vizier said to him, Everyone has been here to bathe, save the 3 sons of that Padishah who died recently. They still remain behind. Then the Padishah sent word to the deceased Padishah's 3 sons to come and bathe. When they came, he looked closely at their garments and perceived that the youngest of the 3 wore a sheath without a sword. At this the Padishah called the youngest son to him. Great is the good you have done me, he said. Therefore ask me what you will. I ask nothing from you, replied the youth, except your youngest daughter. Alas, my son, ask me anything but that, sighed the Padishah. Ask my crown, my kingdom, and I'll give them to you. But my daughter I cannot give you. If you give me your daughter, I will take her, replied the prince, but nothing else will I take from your hand. My son, groaned the Padishah, I will give you my eldest daughter. I will give you my second daughter. Nay, I'll give you the pair of them if you will. But my youngest daughter has a deadly enemy, the wind demon. Because I would not give her to him, I must fence her room about with walls of steel, lest any of the devil race approach her. The wind demon is such a terrible monster that I cannot see nor dart overtake him. Like the tempest he flies, and his coming is like the coming of a whirlwind. But whatever the Padishah might say to the prince, it fell on deaf ears. He begged and pleaded so hard for the damsel that the Padishah finally promised her to him. They held the bridal banquet, and the 2 elder brothers received the 2 elder damsels in marriage and returned to their kingdom. But the youngest brother remained behind to guard his wife against the wind demon. Time passed, and the prince avoided the light of the day for the sake of his lovely princess. One day, however, he said to his wife, Behold, now, my princess, all this time I have never moved from your side. I would like to go hunting, though it only be for an hour or so. Alas, my lord, replied his wife, if you leave me, I know that you will never see me again. But as he begged her often and promised to return soon, at last his wife consented. Then he took his weapons and went forth into the forest. Now the wind demon had been waiting for this chance all along. He feared the famous prince and dared not snatch his wife from his arms. But as soon as the prince had put his foot outside the palace, the wind demon came in and vanished with his bride. When the prince returned from the hunt, he could not find his wife anywhere. He was certain that the wind demon must have taken her, since no other living soul could have gotten near her. Bitterly did he weep, fiercely did he dash himself against the floor. But then he quickly rose up, took horse, and galloped away into the wide world, determined to find either death or his beloved. He went on for days and for weeks. In his trouble and anguish, he gave himself no rest. Now all at once, like a mirage, a palace sprang up before him. It was the palace of his eldest sister. The damsel was just then looking out the window, and lo, she caught sight of a man wandering there where never a bird had flown and never a caravan had traveled. Then she recognized him as her brother, and great was their mutual joy. Toward evening, the damsel said to her brother, "The lion will be here shortly, and although he is very good to me, he is only a brute beast for all that, and may do you a mischief." And she took her brother and hid him. In the evening, the lion came home, and when they had sat down together and begun to talk, the girl asked him what he would do if any of her brothers should chance to come there. "If the eldest were to come," said the lion, "I would strike him dead with one blow. If the second came, I would slay him also. But if the youngest came, I would let him go to sleep on my paws if he liked." "Then he has come," said his wife. "Where is he? Where is he? Bring him out. Let me see him," cried the lion. When Prince Mehmed appeared, the lion did not know what to do for joy. They began to talk, and the lion asked him why he had come and whither he was going. The youth told him what had happened and said he was going to seek the wind demon. "I know very little of him," said the lion, "but take my word for it, you had better have nothing to do with him at all, for there is none that can cope with the wind demon." The youth would not listen to reason, however, and he remained there that night only, and next morning mounted his horse again. The lion accompanied him a short distance to show him the way, and then they parted. Again he went on until he saw another palace, and this was the palace of his middle sister. The damsel was looking out the window, and no sooner did she recognize her brother than she rushed out to meet him and led him into the palace. Full of joy, they conversed together till evening, and then the damsel said to the youth, "In a short time my tiger husband will be here. I will hide you from him, lest a mischief befall you. And she took her brother and hid him. The tiger came home, and as they talked together, his wife asked him what he would do if any of her brothers should chance to look in on them. "If the elder two were to come," said the tiger, "I would strike them dead. But if the youngest came, I would go down on my knees before him." Whereupon the damsel called to her youngest brother to come forth. The tiger was overjoyed to see him, welcomed him as a brother, and asked him from where he had come and where he was going. Then the prince told the tiger of his trouble and asked him whether he knew the wind demon. "Only by hearsay," replied the tiger, and then he tried to persuade the youth not to continue his quest, for the danger was great. But the red dawn had no sooner appeared than the prince was ready to set out again. The tiger showed him the road. He pursued his way, and it seemed endlessly long. At last a dark object stood out in front of him. "What can it be?" he thought, and when he drew nearer he saw that it was a palace. It was the abode of his youngest sister. The damsel was just then looking out of the window. "Oh, my brother!" she cried, and very nearly fell out the window for pure joy. Then she led him into the house. The youth rejoiced that he had found all his sisters so well, but the loss of his wife was still a weight upon his heart. When evening was drawing near, the girl said to her brother, "My bird husband will be here soon. Conceal yourself from him, for if he sees you, he may tear your heart out." And with that she took her brother and hid him. And now there was a great clapping of wings, and the Anka had scarcely entered when his wife asked him what he would do if any of her brothers came to see them. "As to the two elder," said the bird, "I would take them in my mouth, fly up to the sky with them, and cast them down. But if the youngest were to come, I would let him sit down on my wings and go to sleep there if he liked." Then the girl called forth her youngest brother. "Welcome, my dear friend," cried the bird. "How did you find your way here? How did you make this long journey?" The youth told what had happened to him and asked the Anka whether he could help him find the wind demon. "It is no easy matter," said the bird. "Even if you could get to him, I would counsel you to let it be and stay rather with us." "Not I," replied the resolute youth. "I will either release my wife or perish." Then the Anka saw that he could not turn him from his purpose, and began to explain to him all about the palace of the wind demon. "He is now asleep," said the Anka, "and you may be able to carry off your wife. But if he should awake and see you, he will without doubt grind you to pieces. Guard against him you cannot, for I cannot see him, and fire cannot harm him. So look after yourself." The next day the youth set out on his journey, and when he had traveled for a long time, he saw before him a vast palace that had neither door nor chimney, nor length nor breadth. It was the palace of the wind demon. His wife chanced just then to be sitting at the window, and when she saw her husband, she leaped straight out of the window to him. The prince caught his wife in his arms, and there were no bounds to their joy, and no end to their tears, until at last the girl remembered the terrible demon. "This is now the third day that he has slept," she cried. "Let us hasten away before the fourth day, at which time he will awake." So they mounted, sped their horses on, and were already well on their way when the wind demon awoke on the fourth day. He went to the girl's door and asked her to open it, that he might at least see her face for a brief moment. There was no answer. Guessing some evil, he beat in the door, and lo, the place where the damsel should have lain was cold. So Prince Mehmed, he cried, "You have come and stolen away my sultana. Well, we shall see. Go on, whip your feet, steed, but I'll catch you in the long run." And with that, he sat down at his ease, drank his coffee, smoked his chibuk, and then got up and went after them. Meanwhile, the prince was galloping off with the girl with all his might. All at once, the girl felt the demon's breath and cried out in her terror, "Alas, my lord, the wind demon is here." Like a whirlwind, the invisible monster was upon them. He caught up the youth, tore off his arms and legs, and smashed his skull and all his bones till there was not a bit of him left. The damsel began to weep bitterly. "Even if you have killed him," she sobbed, "let me at least gather together his bones and pile them up somewhere, for I would like to bury him." "I care not what you do with his bones," cried the wind demon. The damsel took the bones of her husband, piled them up together, kissed the horse between the eyes, placed the bones on his saddle, and whispered in his ear, "Take these bones, my good steed. Take them to the proper place." Then the wind demon took the girl and led her back to the palace, for the power of her beauty was so great that it always kept him close to her. But she never allowed the monster to come into her chamber. At her chamber door he had to stop, but he was permitted to show himself to her now and then. Meanwhile, the good steed galloped away with the youth's bones, till he stopped at the door of the palace of the youngest sister, and there he neighed and neighed till the damsel heard him. She rushed out to the horse, and when she perceived the knapsack, and in the knapsack the bones of her brother, she began to weep bitterly, and dashed herself against the ground, as if she would dash herself to pieces. She could hardly wait for her lord the Anka to come home. At last there was a sound of mighty wings in the padishah of the birds. The emerald Anka came home, and when he saw the scattered bones of the prince in the basket, he called together all the birds of the air and asked them, "Which of you goes to the garden of paradise?" "An old owl is the only one that goes there," the birds replied, "and he has now grown so old that he has no more strength left for such a journey." Then the Anka sent a bird to bring the owl to him on his back. The bird flew away, and in a very short time was back again with the aged owl on his back. "Well, my father," said the bird padishah, "have you ever been in the garden of paradise?" "Yes, my little son," croaked the aged owl. A long, long time ago, 12 years or more, but I haven't been there since. Well, if you have been there, said the Anka, go again now and bring me back a little glass of water. The old owl insisted that it was a long, long way for him to go and that he would never be able to survive the journey. The Anka would not listen to him, but perched him on a bird's back, and both flew into the garden of paradise. There the owl drew a glass of water and returned to the Anka's palace. Then the Anka took the youth's bones and began to put them together. The arms, the legs, the head, the thighs, everything he put in its proper place. And when he had sprinkled it all with the water, the youth yawned as if he had been asleep and came to himself again. He looked all about him and asked the Anka where he was and how he came there. Did I not tell you that the wind demon would twist you round his little finger? Replied the Anka. He ground all your bones and sinews to dust, and we have only now picked them all out of the basket. Now you had better leave him alone, for if you get into the clutches of this demon once more, I know that we shall never be able to put you together again. The youth was not content to do this, however, and insisted on seeking his bride a second time. Well, if you are bent on going at any price, counseled the Anka, go immediately to your wife and ask her if she knows the whereabouts of the demon's talisman. If only you can get hold of that, even the wind demon will be in your power. Again the prince mounted his horse. Again he went right up to the wind demon's palace, and as the demon was asleep, the youth was able to talk to his own lovely wife. After they had rejoiced at the sight of each other, the youth told his love to discover the secret of the demon's talisman and win it by wheedling words and soft caresses if she could get it no other way. Meanwhile, the youth hid himself in the neighboring mountain and there awaited the good news. When the wind demon awoke from his 4 days' sleep, he again presented himself at the damsel's door. Depart from before my eyes, cried the girl. Here you have done nothing but sleep these past 4 days, so that life has been a loathsome thing to me all the while. The demon rejoiced that he was allowed to be in the room with the damsel, and in his happiness asked her what he should give her to help her to while away the time. What can you give me, said the girl, seeing that you yourself are nothing but wind? If at least you had a talisman that at any rate would be something to while away the time with. Alas, my sultana, replied the demon, my talisman is far away, in the farthest ends of the earth, and one cannot fetch it in an instant. If only we had some such brave man as your Mehmed was, he perhaps might be able to go for it. The damsel was not more curious than ever about the talisman, and she coaxed and coaxed until at last she persuaded the demon to tell her about it, but only after she had granted him permission to sit down beside her. The damsel could not refuse him that happiness. He sat down and breathed into her ear the secret of the talisman. On the surface of the 7th layer of sea, began the demon, there is an island. On that island an ox is grazing. In the belly of that ox there is a golden cage, and in that cage there is a white dove. That little dove is my talisman. But how can one get to the island? She inquired. I'll tell you, said the demon. Opposite the palace of the Emerald Anka is a huge mountain, and on top of the mountain is a spring. Every morning 40 seahorses come to drink at that spring. If anyone can be found who is able to catch one of these horses by the leg, but only while he is drinking the water, and bridle him, saddle him, and leap on his back, he will be able to go wherever he likes. The seahorse will say to him, what do you command, my sweet master? And will carry him wheresoever he bids him. What good will the talisman be to me if I cannot get near it? Said the girl. With that she drove the demon from the room. And when again the time of his slumber arrived, she hastened with the news to her lord. Then the prince leaped on his horse, hastened to the palace of his youngest sister, and told the matter to the Anka. Early next morning the Anka rose, called 5 birds, and said to them, lead the prince to the spring on the mountain beyond, and wait there until the seahorses come. 40 steeds will appear by the running water, and when they begin to drink, seize one of them, bridle and saddle it, and put the prince on its back. The birds took the prince, carried him up to the mountain close by the spring. And as soon as the horses came up, they did what the Anka had said. The youth leaped on the horse's back, and the first thing the good steed said was, "What do you command, my sweet master?" "There is an island on the surface of the seventh ocean," cried the prince, "and there would I like to be." He was carried away before you could shut your eyes, and before you could open them again. There he was on the shore of that island. He dismounted from his horse, took off the bridle, put it in his pocket, and went off to seek the ox. As he was walking along the shore, a man approached and asked him what had brought him there. "I have had a shipwreck," replied the youth. "My ship and everything I possess have perished, and only with difficulty did I swim ashore." "As for me," said the man, "I am in the service of the wind demon. There is an ox on this island, and I must watch it night and day. Would you like to enter the service? You will have nothing else to do all day but watch this beast." The youth took advantage of the opportunity offered him and could scarcely await the moment when he was to see the ox. At watering time, the man brought it along, and no sooner did the prince find himself alone with the beast than he cut open its belly, took out the golden cage with the white dove, and hastened with them to the seashore. Then he drew the bridle from his pocket, and when he had struck the sea with it, the steed immediately appeared and cried, "What do you command, sweet master?" "I desire to be taken to the palace of the wind demon," the youth replied. "In the time it takes to shut and open your eyes, there they were before the wind demon's palace." Then he took his wife and bade her sit down beside him on the seahorse. And when the steed said, "What do you command, sweet master?" he ordered it to fly straight to the emerald Anka. Away flew the steed. It flew right up to the very clouds, and as they were approaching the Anka's palace, the demon awoke from his sleep. He saw that his wife had again disappeared and immediately set off in pursuit. Soon the princes felt the breath of the demon, and he had all but overtaken them when the steed hastily bade them twist the neck of the white dove in the cage. They had barely time to do so when the wind died away and the wind demon was destroyed. With great joy they arrived at the Anka's palace and let the horse go his way with their thanks. On the next day they went to their second brother-in-law, and on the third day to their third brother-in-law, and it was only then that the prince discovered that his lion brother-in-law was really the king of all the lions, and his tiger brother-in-law the king of all the tigers. At last they reached the domain of his wife's father. Here a great banquet was made to celebrate their return, and the royal couple rejoiced their hearts for 40 days and 40 nights, after which they journeyed to the prince's own empire. There he showed the people the ears and nose of the dragon, and as he had thus fulfilled the wishes of his father, and as he now wished to rule, they chose him to be their Padishah. And the lives of the new Padishah and his Sultana were full of joy until the day of their death.